Hello and welcome to this podcast and to the analysis of Toffler's Wave by Nicolas Lapoujade. Today we are going to talk about the 3 decades that I have chosen for an in-depth analysis of the evolution of the computer and computer in education per se. We will talk about the 1950s, the 1970s, and the 1990s. The reason these were chosen is because they are the most significant years as far as computer either invention or technological advances, and that they connect together along with some very significant society advances or shifts and changes that we will talk about in just a little bit. The first decade that I will analyze are the 1950s. The 1950s are extremely important when it comes to Strand 2, the computer era. This is when the computer started to really come out, and a little war in Strand 3 between IBM and MIT started erupting. In 1950, ERA or ERA 1101 was the first commercially computer invented. It was made for the U.S. Navy. Now we can understand that the Navy and the military in general really wanted a lot of technology and as fast as possible. In a post-war world with the USA coming on top and being able to dictate a lot of financial outcomes in the world, technologies were in high demand, and computers in particular. In Strand 5, we can also see that the U.S. are in the midst of the Cold War and trying to rise technologically faster than the communist and the USSR. In 1951, MIT invented the Whirlwind, which was a giant computer, bigger than a man and wider than many men, and it was the first computer that was seen on TV. It was the first popularization of computer technology, the first time that the public could really see what was going on with technology. At the same time, if I look at Strand 6, the global communication, the TVs and TV usage rises in the United States at this time. Still in 1951, in England, offices are getting Lyons Electronic Office to solve clerical problems. This is the first time that offices are able to have a software that can create help for human workers. In 1953, IBM ships its first electronic computer. In 1954, 450 units of this computer are sold in 1 year, which is a record at the time. In 1956, MIT builds the TX0, the first computer with transistors. The parts effectively become replaceable. The fact that the parts are replaceable is a huge leap into the technology itself, which means that we are looking at consumer replaceability. We are looking at the consumer being able to replace the part if it's malfunctioning at any point of time. Finally, in 1959, IBM releases the Stretch. It is the most popular computer of the time. On the education side, Skinner continues to refute all previous theories, and continues to advance his own. The next decade I would like to talk about is the 1970s. In the 1970s, there is a huge shift that happens in society. And it will be useful to look at all the other strands before we look at even Strand 2, the technology. In Strand 4, the education one, the adult learning theory is coming out, which means that not only children are allowed and able to learn at school, but adults now can as well. In the same verve, if we look at Strand 3, a huge environment shift is happening. There are still a lot of drug uses. The environment is trying to be pushed. There is an anti-war climate that still happens, stemming from the 1960s. And all of these strands, including the Strand 5, the silent majority that elected Nixon, and Nixon's scandal, the conservatism that comes back, and the liberal strands that are still in place, means a big distrust in politics. And that distrust in politics leads to personalization when it comes to the computer. And that is a huge turning point for computer technology and education. Now it's time to look at the actual technology itself, Strand 2, but before we do so, we need to look at Strand 6. In 1975, the statistics is that 94% of the USA owns a black and white TV. There is a huge shift towards mediatization. This mediatization means that for computers, the gaming is huge in the sense that if they want to be profitable, if they want to be marketable to the huge population, to the entire population, they will need to do something big and make them accessible. In 1970s, Apollo 13 is launched to the moon. It doesn't have much to do with computers per se or consumerism per computers, but what it does have to do with it is showing the technological advance that the United States have and their win pretty much in the Cold War. In 1971, as far as computers are concerned, the floppy disk is released. The floppy disk will be used for decades. It is a mini form of the hard drive. It is just a small, thin little piece that can record information. For the first time, you do not have to use a cassette anymore, and the floppy can be used in 2 different sizes. This will lead later on to CDs first, and then USB, and in more recent technology, solid-state drives. In 1974, a smartphone was already coined as a term to describe a phone that could act as a computer. The last decade I would like to talk about are the 1990s. This is really where the boom of the internet and the creation of the web made computers so important for educational technology. In 1989, 15% of the households had a computer. In 2000, 51% had a computer, with 41.5% connected to the online world. If I look at strand 6, the global communication, the computers became common in schools, in library, and other common places. If we look at strand 4, education is also on the rise. 83% of the population graduates from high school, from a 4-year high school, compared to 60% in 1960. The web springs up with educational websites. There is also a huge advance in distance education programs offered in school. The last big thing for education is that No Child Left Behind is implemented, really asking that every child graduates and has a chance. This really helps computers take an important role in education. If we come back to strand 2, in 1994, IBM, the Simon Personal Communicator, is a mix of phone and a personal digital assistant. And this is the first smartphone ever, before the iPod, before the iPad, before the Android. The IBM Simon Personal Communicator was this. This is the last blow of IBM in that little war that we were talking about earlier, that really made this happen. Nokia from Sweden in 1996 releases the Nokia 9000, which leads to an explosion in the late 2000s. An explosion of cell phones, which will include later on HTC, Apple, and all the other ones in 2000. For strand 3 in 1992, the internet allowed a new mode of communication and a new mode for business. For communication, emails were born, and for business, the biggest thing was the e-commerce, which means that people were for the first time able to buy anything online. These are the ancestors for Amazon.com and other big box online that made into a huge profit and a huge business. To conclude this podcast, I would say that the computer was born out of a post-war will of the United States to dominate the rest of the world, not necessarily in education, but more especially after the Cold War, and that it deviated into some very specific application for education. It's still trying to find itself right now, but mostly a changing political view in the main population, and a war between 2 companies, IBM and MIT's, really led to what the computer is nowadays. Of course, the biggest influence was the 1990s when the internet came out, and when the computer was able to be linked to not only the internet, but also be able to be reduced to PDA size, so that it can start being a very personal computer. Thank you.